Irene, Helen, Mary, Richter, Zucker, Gander.
That's a long name.
Huh?
I said that's a long name.
Well, Mary was my confirmation name. When we were confirmed in the Catholic Church, you take another name. So I took the name Mary.
Okay.
Because my mother's name was Bertha Mary.
Your mother's name was? How old are you now?
87,
And when were you born?
July 27th, 1903.
And where were you born?
Oil City, Pennsylvania.
Where was your mother born?
I presume she was born in Oil City too.
Okay. What was her maiden name?
Bertha Mary Lynch.
Do you know where your mother's mother was born?
Yes. Bavaria, Germany.
How about your mother's father?
I can't say because he was adopted by my great-grandmother, and he was of Scotch-Irish ancestry, and his name was Beriah McGuffin Lynch. So I imagine the McGuffin part was the Scotch part. Nobody's ever heard of the name Beriah McGuffin.
Okay.
It's the only one I know of.
Huh. Do you know where your grandmother on your mother's side was born?
On my mother, in Bavaria, Germany.
Bavaria, Germany, okay. And then where was your grandfather on your mother's side born?
Beriah, I don't know because I said he was adopted
Oh,
by
right,
my
okay.
great-grandmother.
Okay. So then your mother's side of the family came from Germany?
Yeah. And her mother, my grandmother's maiden name was Johanna Gaber.
Mm-hmm.
And they settled in Pennsylvania, and they were what were called the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Pennsylvania Dutch. Where was your father born?
He must have been born in Syracuse, New York, because that's where the Richter family lived.
Do you know where your father's mother was born?
No, I don't. I do know her maiden name was Falk, F-A-L-K, because I drove to Syracuse with John to see the cemetery where they were buried, and then I saw her with the gravestone, and it was F-A-L-K. And the family name was Richter, R-I-C-H-T-E-R.
Okay.
They had a large family.
Okay. What about your father's father? Do you know?
I do not know anything about him. I do know that his mother had been a school teacher, and while I was
Your father's mother?
Yes,
okay.
my paternal grandmother.
Okay.
And I never got a chance to meet her in person, but I used to correspond with her. She was a darling little person, and I enjoyed, corresponding with her.
Okay. So as far as you know, where did your father's ancestors come from? You have no idea because he was adopted?
Repeat that again.
Your father's ancestors.
Well, as I remarked, Roger was only 7 years old when his father died. And
No, I'm talking about your father's.
My father?
Your father's ancestors.
I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. Do you remember hearing any stories about why your ancestors on your mother's side came to America?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I'm sorry I didn't have the curiosity to ask those questions when I was growing up.
Did they ever talk about, Germany or anything like that? Okay. So as far as you know, the different branches of your family settled in where?
Well, my father's family were in the Syracuse, New
York
area,
Okay.
and Rochester, apparently. And I think there were 14 children in the family. They all had large families in those days.
Okay. You remember your mother's parents?
My mother's parents?
Yes.
Oh, my grandmother and grandfather, definitely. I adored them.
Okay, why don't you
Why
tell me a little bit about
I want
your
to tell you
grandparents?
about my maternal grandfather.
I remember some great stories. Why don't you
Well,
tell me a little bit about him?
He was 2 years old when he was blinded with smallpox. And then he was educated apparently at a school in Philadelphia for the blind people. And of course, when I was aware of him, I was just a small child.
Sure.
And he was so damn funny and independent as a hog on ice. He never talked like a blind person. He also, well, because he had a friend who came in and read the paper to him every morning, and he always said, well, I saw in the paper so-and-so, or I just, you know. And when my husband met him before we were married, and he was at my mother's home in Ashtabula, and Roger was talking to him, and he said to Roger, he said, well, you know, the roads today aren't wide enough to accommodate a car and a hay wagon. And Roger says to me, how the hell does he know how big a hay wagon is? But he always talked like a sighted person. You know, and as I said, he was very independent and funny, and a sense of humor. He used to crack me up. I just loved him. He was in his 80s when he died, and so was my grandmother.
Do you remember hearing any stories about how your grandfather and grandmother met?
No.
Or how they first got together? I wish I did. Okay. Your grandmother on your mom's side, what do you remember about her?
Well, she...
what kind of person was she?
Oh, she's fun to be with too. But she, in her later years, she was not in poor health, but she had put on a lot of weight and didn't get around too well. But I used to love to go and visit with her because, and watch her. In the old days, the women always wore caps in the morning because they put their hair up in rollers or something, and they'd wear these caps in the morning. So it was, and I'd go when she was taking it off and combing her hair and everything, and she'd be talking to me. We'd be sitting there laughing together, and of course they spoiled me and my brother terribly because we were the only grandchildren. And as soon as we walked in the doors, what do you want, you know? And my grandfather had a store, and he also had a candy counter. And of course, he'd always go to the candy counter with a bag and say, well, what would you like to have? And I was taught to be modest and shy, and I'd say, well, I don't care. And then he said, I don't care either. And then he'd put the bag down and go and sit down. And he's standing there, and I thought, oh boy, I'm not going to get the candy. You know, he did it deliberately, you know,
sure.
Funny. And then he said to me, well, go sit on your elbow and have an armchair. You know, to me that was particularly funny. But as I said, whenever we went there, and it was mandatory, my brother and I had to go and visit our grandparents every week. And of course it was a small town and not a long walk or anything like that. But as I said, ice cream, whatever you want. And like we were just spoiled rotten. And my uncle, my mother's twin brother, too, and her other brother Ed. You know, I was just spoiled.
What was her twin brother's name?
My mother's name was Bertha, and her twin brother was, and her twin was named Bert.
Okay.
And he was always in the restaurant or hotel business. So when we were growing up, if there was a carnival or anything, a circus coming to town, he always had tickets for everything, and Paul and I always got the tickets, you know.
And Paul's your brother?
Yeah. And our school was in the downtown, right, you know, in the downtown area, and at that time, Uncle Bert had a hotel across the street. So Paul and I used to always have our lunches there instead of going home for lunch, you know, at noon.
Let's go back to your grandmother for a second. What did she look like? Do you remember?
I'm trying to think. I can't. Of course, my mother would be a combination of both of them, wouldn't she? But the Lynch characteristics seem to be the ones that I remember, but she was a pleasant-looking woman, nothing extraordinary, but just pleasant, jolly, good company.
Okay. Now, how many children did she have?
Well, she had my mother and her twin brother, and my Uncle Ed and Uncle Charles, but Uncle Charles died of smallpox when he was only 12 years old, so I didn't know him.
Do you remember any of her skills or her abilities?
No,
Okay.
she's just a good grandma and a good, and I used to go and have lunch too with her when I was in school, and she was a wonderful German cook and used to make wonderful noodles and things like that, and things that I liked, you know.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what social class she came from?
Social? Couldn't have been any, I don't think any of the family were moneyed people, as you might say. I think they were very ordinary, you know.
How important was she to you?
Well, in my memories, she's very important because, as I said, I remember her, I can see her, now I can see her vividly, and my grandparents and everything have very vivid memories of them.
Do you, you mentioned the noodles and stuff. Do you remember any other family traditions or anything she might have passed on to you, or any material possessions, or any kind of ways to look at life, or anything that she passed on to you?
I can't think they have anything special. Being German, the German people are great disciplinarians, and so my brother and I were always disciplined. We never got out of line, so to speak, never got away with anything, so to speak, with them. And it seemed like cleanliness was very important to them. I remember I was helping her clean up after a meal, and I was going to dry the skillet. She said, "Irene, did you rinse that off?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, rinse it before you dry it." And I remember my own father, when I went to the dinner table one night, he said, "Irene, did you wash your hands before you came to the table?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Go wash your hands." Those things stick in my memory forever. It's funny how they just happen to be, you know, this thing about being cleanly.
Mm-hmm. Your grandmother on your mom's side, do you know what she died of? You mentioned she was in her 80s.
Just old age. They were probably, their hearts gave out or something. I don't remember any particular illness except that they just grew old. And the funny thing was that one time when she wasn't feeling well, they wanted to call a doctor in for her, and she said, and they named a doctor, and she said, "Oh, I don't want him." And they said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, he was sick once himself." But in the old days, we didn't have doctors. Your mother was a doctor. And I only remember having a doctor once, and that was when I fell. We had in the creek. We had a creek running back of the house, and I was wading, and I fell and must have hit a tin can or something and cut a little place on my knee, and that was the only time I ever remember seeing a doctor around. People just didn't have doctors in those days. If you had a fever, you got spirits in there. If anything else, you got. You hesitated to tell your mother you didn't feel good. You knew what the first thing she was going to do was give you a dose of castor oil.
Do you know where your grandmother's buried?
She must be buried in Oil City.
Pennsylvania?
She must be buried there, and my grandfather too.
Okay, let's talk about your grandfather for a little bit on your mom's side.
Yeah.
You mentioned that he was blind.
From 2 years old.
And he owned a little store, or like a food store, grocery store?
Yeah, he had there, and I remember he had some pool tables in the back. People could come in and play pool. And what people couldn't figure out was he was able to distinguish between paper coins, paper money. Coins anybody could, but they couldn't figure him out because they tried to fool him, but he knew whether whether it was a 20 or a 10 or a 2 or a 1, just by the feel of it. And he had only had to hear your voice once, and the next time you went in and said, "Hello, Mr. Lynch," he knew who you were. And my stepfather was so amazed by that too, because he thought he'd fool him, he'd go in and he wouldn't say who he was, and he, right away, he said,
So his first name was?
My stepfather?
Your grandfather.
Oh, Beriah
Lynch.
Beriah McGuffin.
McGuffin?
Yeah, so I mentioned this because he was supposed to be Irish and Scots ancestry, so I mentioned that's the Scotch part, because
Okay.
I looked in places where names are, and nobody's ever heard of the
And
name.
you mentioned he was adopted?
Yes, he was adopted by my great-grandmother Solomon. She had children, about 12 children of her own. In those days, people had large families, but they also took in other people if they were orphaned. It was large families were just,
Mm-hmm.
it was the way it was in the old days.
So he had the store.
Yeah.
I remember you told me about how he could always tell the bills apart and stuff. What kind of person was he? What was his personality like?
Oh God, as I told you, he was independent as a hog and ice and funny as a crutch. He had a sense of humor, He just kept me laughing all the time. He was.
Can you remember anything specific, any other stories about him, any other memories or good times that come to mind right now?
Oh, I remember one story because it was written up in what they called the Oil City Derrick. See, Oil City was an oil town, and the paper was called the Derrick. See, an oil derrick.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's brother Ed was the managing editor for that paper. And he was apparently downtown, and there was probably just a small trolley line running in the town, and he got in the street and wasn't aware of it, and it hit him, and he had the sense to grab onto whatever it was, the door or something, and so he wasn't hurt, but he had his mind, his, I'm searching for the right word, presence of mind to
grab hold.
Yeah, and hang on.
Wow.
When it was written up, and of course, his initials being BM, people would seldom say Blind Man Lynch.
Oh, okay. How did he, the Lynch part, that's what's confusing to me. I thought his last name was, I thought you said his last name.
I can hardly hear you.
The Lynch part, what is it? Is that his last name, Lynch?
Lynch, yeah, that must have
Okay.
been where the Irish part came.
Okay.
See, that's an Irish name.
And his middle name was?
McGuffin.
McGuffin, okay. Okay.
And my great-grandmother name was Sullivan. See, that's Irish too. And that's probably where the Catholic part of my life came in, because I don't think my father was Catholic, but they were apparently married in the Catholic faith, because my brother and I were brought up Catholic, period. And as I said, I recollect, I was 7 when my father deserted my mother, and but I remember that he was a fun person too, and the kids all liked him. We had a back porch, and they'd all line up, and he'd stand there, and they'd jump into and he'd catch them in his arms, and he'd play games with us, and he was, I have, any recollection I have of him is of a fun person, I enjoyed him, and whatever the reasons were for his walking off, I don't know.
Now going back to your grandfather for a minute.
Now you'll have to talk about it.
Going back to your grandfather for a minute. How did he get around town? I mean, did he have a cane?
He had a cane.
He had a cane?
Mm-hmm.
And would people give him, I mean, he just walked everywhere?
Yeah, he just went everywhere. It was a small town, and everybody knew him, and he knew everybody in town.
What did he look like?
He was tall and handsome. He was at least, I would say 6 foot, and my mother's brother, both her brothers were tall, and handsome. I call them handsome men. I mean, good features and
Any distinctive characteristics that come to mind?
well, I look like my mother, and my mother looked like the Lynches, like my grandfather.
Okay. What was he like emotionally? Was he quiet? Was he loud?
No, he was very quiet.
Mhm.
And in the old days, I guess it was a habit, the older generation, they all had, would have a little jigger of liquor before their meal. My stepfather, who was Swedish, did the same thing. We never had liquor in the house as such, you know, beer or any wine or anything like that. But it was a habit, that a little, I remember it was just a little jigger, about an ounce or so, and it was always before meals he'd have it. And as I said, my grandmother was German and could make wonderful dumplings and dough and things like that. And every time she served chicken and dumplings or something was done, he'd say, "Oh, we're having boiled dough again." He called it boiled dough, in kind of in a derisive way, as we couldn't, we didn't like it.
So you mentioned he was pretty funny. Was he?
Oh, he was funny.
Was he stern? I mean, was he easygoing?
Easygoing.
Do you remember any other funny stories about him or anything that come to mind, or any other?
Not particularly, as I said, I do remember that Paul and I just loved going over to visit with him. I mean, it was no chore, or it wasn't anything that we didn't want to do, because we knew that we'd get spoiled the minute we walked in the door, whatever we want, you could have.
Just you and Paul would walk over, or would your mom go with you too?
No, we'd go ourselves.
And on Sundays, or?
Oh, during the week or something. And then, on Sunday, my uncle Ed, my mother's other brother, used to hire a surrey from the livery stable, and we'd pile on the family into that and drive to Franklin, PA, which was 7 miles away, and that was a whole afternoon's recreation. I mean, we loved it, 7 miles with a horse and buggy, it was great. Nobody had cars in those days.
Did your grandfather pass on any traditions or any characteristics or any ways that you look at life?
Well, I remember he had one brother, Jim, who lived in Bayonne, New Jersey, and his wife, and they used to come visit. And I don't know if he had other brothers or sisters, I can't remember, but I remember Uncle Jim. And he too was a handsome, they were all tall and handsome. That's where Roger gets his height, from that side of the family, because the Zuckers were not tall people. But Roger, your dad, is tall, and he gets the height from my side of the family.
Do you think you have any of his qualities, and do you think you have any of his qualities in you?
Yeah, my sense of humor, which I treasure.
I agree. Do you remember how he died?
Yes, he was, as I said, he was at my mother's home when he did die. He was 82 years old, and I was a registered nurse, as you know. And so he was using my room, sleeping there, and I would stay there was a double bed, and I would sleep there at night, just watch over him, see that if he got up at night, because our house wasn't as familiar to him as, his own, and to see that he didn't have any accidents or anything. And when I'd get up and say, "Grandpa, let me help you," he'd say, "Irene, you couldn't do anything." He said, "I'm too big for you to handle." He said, "Don't bother, I'm too big for you to handle." And he was having heart problems then, and I think he just passed away in his sleep. That's all I remember. While he was at my mother's house, and Mom was there.
And do you know where he was buried?
I'm sure he must have been buried in as far as I know, he must have been buried in Oil City, because I don't know have any recollection of any other place where he would have been buried.
Okay. Are there any family heirlooms or property that came down from your grandparents on your mom's side of the family?
Gosh, I'd have to think awfully hard about it because I never, you know, as I said, we were not family with that were what you call married people, but there was always money for the necessities, and when we needed anything, why we got, it was always, you know, agreeable to take care of it and see that we were, it was, as I said, my mother said that my father was was a musician. She said he could pick up any instrument and play it, violin, anything, he'd just pick it up and play it. And he was always organizing little groups of musicians and getting them together. So like, that's where my fondness for music comes from. And Paul, my brother, we both, we used to, she saw that we bought a piano. I think it cost her $50 for an old upright piano, and we took piano lessons from a teacher for like 50 cents a week. You know, about what we learned scales and sharps and flats and very little else. But Paul and I played by ear. My brother could just hear any kind of a tune and sit down and play it, and I was the same way. But when I was in my later years, after I had children, I was determined to learn and to appreciate the classics. And when I studied, I had a wonderful teacher, and I studied for about 9 years with him, and then I lost my ability to sit down and play by ear. And I'm trying to get it back now.
So you think you got your musical ability from your
It
grandfather?
must have come from my father.
No.
Paul Frederick Richter.
Okay. Now let's talk about your father's parents, their names. Do you remember their names? I think you... Okay.
No, because he was adopted, you see.
Well, what about his adoptive parents?
Well, all I remember is my little great-grandmother Sullivan. She was a little tiny Irish woman.
Okay. What do you remember anything? I mean, what kind of person was she like? You mentioned that you...
I don't know, in the olden days, children seemed to be loved. I mean, it was wonderful because your family was always around you. My aunts and uncles, my grandparents, and we were always had a great deal of affection from them and caring. You know, so that to me is the happiest part, because I think I had a wonderful childhood because we had family. Where today the families are scattered and they're not as large as they used to be, but we always had lots of fun. My aunts and uncles, they just loved us, and we'd go and they loved to have us come and stay overnight with them and treat us. We were, you know, we were special.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about, I remember you mentioned your father left when you were about 7 years old.
Yeah, I was 7 and Paul was 10.
Did you stay in touch with his mother at all after that?
Oh yes, I stayed, and his brother Clarence used to come and visit us in Ashtabula, or in Laurel City rather, and then his brother Harry, too. I kept in touch with him, and that after when I went down to see where they were buried, it was Uncle Harry was the one that took me to the cemetery, and then his wife told me a lot about my father and the family, and that was all in that Bible I told you that it's missing, that album, family album. I kept those letters and everything were in there, and it just breaks my heart because I can't tell you very much. And in fact, when my father left my mother, Uncle Harry said too that no one knew where he was. Even his brothers didn't know where he was. He was a loner. you know, and
His name, your father's name was again?
Paul Frederick. I
Okay.
guess that's the German name. I guess at that time.
Paul
was a-
Frederick Richter?
Yeah, it was a common name, or I guess there was somebody in the German, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that people, they were, probably everybody was calling their children Paul Frederick at the time.
Do you remember anything else about your grandmother? Any stories? I mean, how would you characterize her? Any stories?
Well, as I told you, she would just sit and talk to me, but that's so many years ago, and I was 7 or 8 years old or something, and she just would talk, and I would sit and listen, and I didn't make any special note of what she was talking about. It was just casual conversation, and I was always interested because in those days, children were, as they say, to be seen and not heard, and I loved to sit around with the older people, and when they were talking, and listen to what they were talking about their childhood and their lives, and I just love to be with them. And I like older people today. I still am fond of older people and get along well with them because I was brought up, you know, that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems like you were closer to your mother's parents than you were your father's parents.
Well, they were so far away, and I never had a chance to meet them.
Okay. Do you remember your grandfather on your father's side at all?
I remember my grandmother, Richter,
Okay.
as I told you, she.
Right, but you don't remember your...
The grandfather, I don't know what he did. I really didn't. I should have been
Well,
taking notes, but I wasn't.
It's
At that
okay.
time, it didn't seem.
well, it's okay. I mean, it's a long, that's a long time ago. Do you remember anything about their parents, your grandparents' parents?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
I know my brother. One of his sisters was a nurse, Melissa, and as I said then, I knew his 2 brothers, Clarence and Harry, and they were a lot of fun. And as I said, Clarence used to come to Oil City to visit, and we loved having him. They were all. I just had happy memories. I can't say that I have any unhappy memories about my childhood.
Looking back, do you remember any of your ancestors, any of your relatives that were, maybe notorious characters or black sheep on either side of the family? Nothing comes to mind. Any stories about it? Do you know if any of the men were ladies' men or womanizers or anything like that?
No, my mother's brother, Ed, was a bachelor for many, many years until he married. He married rather late in life. And as I said, her twin brother was married to my Aunt Margaret. And then, of course, they were, as I said, Paul and I were just spoiled because we got lots and lots of attention because my mother was the only one that had any children. Her brothers never had family, and so we were really spoiled rotten.
Okay, well let's talk about your mother a little bit. Her full name was?
Bertha Mary
Okay.
Lynch.
And tell me a little bit about her.
Well, when she was growing up, her mother sent her to apprentice for the seamstress, and she didn't like it, and she would get up and come home, and then my grandmother would just pick her up by the back of the collar and trot her right back. And so when my father deserted her, that she earned her living sewing for other people, and she was a beautiful seamstress. And those were the days when, there was lots of beading and tucks and ribbons and fancy. And my mother was very critical of fabrics and everything. And so when I being the only girl, I was dressed in frills up to my IT, so when I got older and could make choices on my own, I started to buy very plain, very tailored clothes because as I said, I was just beribboned, and it wasn't what I liked. But she was very critical, and when people asked her, they saw the things that she made for me, and they asked her if she would sew for them, so that's where she got started. But she was very critical. She wouldn't do any alterations, and if the people didn't have nice material, she'd just tell them that she wouldn't make whatever they wanted unless they had the good materials. She was, and I used to be around her, so I picked up a lot of things about in sewing, although I never was even put a button on if it fell off. I'd put a safety pin in its place. But we used to make she made all my clothes. We used to make our own hats and everything. Those days we just did. We'd go to the dime store and they used to have what they called buckram, the little shapes, and we'd cover them with silk or velvet or something, and put ribbons or feathers or flowers. Pardon me. We just, everything. It's a whole different era for you to think about.
Sure. Now, do you remember any stories about how your parents met?
No, I never knew.
Did they ever talk about any of the circumstances of how they got married or their courtship?
No.
Okay. Let's talk about your mom for a few minutes, because I know you were very close to her.
Oh, very, very close.
Do you know where she was born?
She must have been born in Oil City, because
In Oil
that's
City.
the only association I have with the family.
And that's where she grew up too, right?
Yeah.
Does she tell you anything about her childhood?
The only thing I remember telling her about how when her mother and my grandmother took her to apprentice with the seamstress, and she didn't like it, and then she'd get up and go home, and then my grandmother would march her right back. And then, so when I was growing up and when I was graduating from high school, the hospital sent a group of people down to recruit nurses for the hospital, and so there were 12 of my graduating class that went in and became student nurses. And my mother was very happy when I told her, because I don't say this to brag, but I was an honor student at school, and I would have loved to have had a year or so of college, but we didn't have the money for it. So when I told her that I was going to be going to nursing, she was delighted, and she said, Irene, if anything happens to me, promise me that you'll finish your nursing career, because she said, you'll never know when it's going to come in handy. So 35 years later, it came in handy, and I went back to nursing.
Just like she
after the children and all left the nest, I went back and nursed for another year.
Just like she went into the seamstress work
Yeah.
when she needed it.
And I laughed when I went back. I said my mother would be laughing if she knew that how true her words were, that you never know when it's going to come in handy.
Did she work at all before she married your father?
I don't believe so. If she did, I don't know what she did.
Did she ever tell you about any boyfriend she might have had before your father?
No. See, I was just aware of her as my mother and my father as my father. I mean.
Do you know how long they knew each other before they got married?
No, none of that comes to mind.
Okay.
At all.
Now I know you have one brother.
Paul.
And he was 4 years older, 3 years older?
3.
Okay.
That's Mary's father. That's Mary's father.
What did your mother look like?
She looked like me. I look like her.
Okay.
I mean, identical, really.
When you think about her, when you remember her, how old is she in your mind?
Well, she was too young when she died. She was 61 when she died, but she had been ill for several years prior to that, and no one knew just what it was, but it turned out that it was cancer. And I never knew how old she was. And when we moved to Ashtabula and would go into people's homes for lunch or whatever the gathering was, and people say, Irene, how old are you? And I feel my mother give me a kick in the shins under the knit table. So I knew that I wasn't supposed to say anything. So when we would leave, I said, Mom, what'd you do that for? She said, I don't want them knowing how old you are, because then they'll figure out how old I am. And I never knew how old she was till I read her obituary in the newspaper. I thought she was about 55, and so did everybody else. She was very youthful looking.
And how old was she though? Do you know?
She was 61.
61 when she died?
Yeah, but it was, oh, the young kids, all my friends loved her. And my dates, the boys that I dated, they were always welcome in the house, and she always said, after we went out, because in those days nobody had cars or anything, we'd walk over to a movie or something and get a nice cream soda or something, and she'd always say, well, bring them in and see if they would like something to eat. She was always had a cookie jar full of cookies or something to make. She always welcomed them in the house, and when she passed away, the first person that came to call on me was the boy that I dated and danced with, Tommy Rennick. They all loved her. And they came right in the house, they had her funeral, they were coming in the house saying, oh my God, where's Bertha, where's Bertha? She was a fun person, you would have loved her. Unfortunately, your father didn't, well, she loved having him down there, but he was too young to remember her very vividly.
And she was in Ashtabula then? Where was she?
She was in Ashtabula at that time.
Do you have any actual photographs, or anybody else have any pictures of her?
I have pictures of her, yes. And when I was rummaging through the other day in the desk, and I found a picture of my father and my mother taken very early in their life. I was so happy to find it, because I didn't have a picture of my father.
I'd love to see it sometime.
I'll show it to you when you go over sometime.
Did your mother have any scars or birthmarks that you remember? Tell me something about your mother that would characterize her. A story or an anecdote that reveals something, what kind of woman she was.
Well, she had tremendous energy. And I inherited that, I think, too. And I remember just always taking such good care of Paul and me, and seeing that we got our education, and as I said, we were always disciplined. That you never sassed your mother. If you did, you'd get it. And her way of punishing us, she had a little branch from a tree or something, a little in the kitchen over the sink. There was a little mirror, and that was behind the mirror, that switch. We call it a switch. And if my brother or I did something, she never moved. She'd just say, Irene or Paul, bring me the switch. She never came after us, and we didn't dare around either. We came and handed her the switch, and then she switched us on the calf of the leg. But if we did something that was really offensive to her, we went across her lap, our pants came down, and the hairbrush. And she hit us till our behinds were rosy red. I can tell you that much. I remember those days, and my brother used to call it, the cruelest picture of it all. And I used to be in terror when she never left us very often, but once in a while in the evening she'd go over to my grandparents or someplace for a few hours, and I'd be left with my brother. And I was so afraid of him, because, he chased me around the house with a hairbrush and stuff. And I was scared. I was really frightened, because and I remember we had an old wooden bed in the bedroom with a wooden headboard and the big footboard, and it was about that wide, and we used to get on the footboard and jump off into the mattress. That was one of our fun things to do. And my brother used to there were railroad tracks that ran through the town, not too far away, and my mother found out that he and his friends were hopping on these trains when they were coming in and slowing down, and they were hopping on these freight trains. And boy, did he got he really got a good snacking that time.
Do you remember anything else, any other stories that stand out in your mind about your mom?
Well, my stepfather, he was a very kind person and thoughtful.
And his name was?
John Swedenborg.
And he married your mom at?
Yes, well, he was cremated. That's why I'm going to be buried next to my mother, because they had a plot for the family plot. He had his brothers and sisters and his family came over from Sweden when he was only 12 years old. And he started right away working for the M.A. Hanna Company, taking what they called numbers. And he was with them when he died, and he was in his early 80s when he died, and he was retired, but when he was there, he was superintendent of the docks and supervised all the loading and unloading of the ore boats, because at that time Ashtabula was one of the largest ore ports on the lakes. And
When did your mom meet him? How old were you?
I was 14 when they were married and moved to Ashtabula. And as I said, he was a grand person, and he never disciplined us, because a few times when my mother, I used to, I guess, cause her lots of problems. And she asked him to speak to me, and he said, Bertha, no, they're your children. And he never disciplined my brother or me, or ever said anything unkind. He never, that was his answer. They're your children, Bertha, and you take care of it.
How much education did your mom have, your mother?
Well, I know she went through grade school, and I don't know whether she had a high school education or not. And those things are very vague, because I guess I wasn't thinking about them, and so I never asked questions about them. But also, in those days, there weren't colleges and schools to go to, just like with your uncle, great grandfather Charlie Zucker. There were no law schools, and he studied law under the guidance of Max Goodman, who was probably the only Jewish attorney in Cleveland at that time. And your grandfather, Charlie Zucker, became very, very successful.
Well, that would have been my great-grandfather.
Right?
Charlie Zucker would have been
Yeah,
my
my
great-grandfather.
great-grandfather. And he became very successful, and I tried to reach Mary, because one time she told me, I lost that obituary, and I've got, oh damn it. But anyhow, she told me that he was John D. Rockefeller and Myron T. Herrick, who's our ambassador to France. He was their attorney. He made a lot of money and did very well. And when he died, he left Roger's grandmother, Addie, very well off financially. And she left, he bought her beautiful, they had a friend by the name of Max Letwitz, and he had an import store in New York for many, many years. And when he would go to Europe, he would bring back beautiful linens and crystal and things for them. And in fact, he used to come to Cleveland, down to the old Wade Park Manor, and bring linens, and the wealthy families, he would go down there and pick out linens and things for their families. And he was very well known, and he visited in our home. I knew him, in fact, the art museum here has some of the things that he donated to them, some beautiful embroidered linens from somewhere. I remember they were out in a showcase years and years ago down at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And that heart that you're going to inherit, or have inherited now, and when when your great-grandmother Addie died, then each of the boys had a beautiful piece of, and your father was the one with got the diamond heart. And Alvin had, there was a diamond pendant, pear-shaped pendant that he got, and Walter got a emerald matrix pin that was set in a pin looking like a peacock, you know, and then he got that. And she had beautiful, like, beautiful crystal, beautiful things, really. And they've gotten scattered and lost in the shuffle.
Going back to your mom, not to change the subject too
Yeah.
much, but when she was when she did seamstress work, did she do that out of the house?
She was in the house, yeah, she was always in the house. And when she she drove the store people crazy, because she'd go down and go in the store and she'd see some kind of a dress that she think I would like that would suit me, and she'd tell me to go in and look at it, and I would, and then she'd cut out her own pattern and copy it. She could do that. I mean, and when we went for clothes, and when the salesperson would leave the dressing room, she'd take the garment, turn it inside out. She said, always do this, Irene, to see if the seams are ample, so that if you have to alter it, that you've got enough material. She was very fussy about all the way the thing was put together. She taught me to be very, very critical of clothes. And I love clothes. She taught me and I think that's where Peter gets his clothes sense too. That's an inherited thing that came to him, you know.
Mm-hmm. Was she a good cook?
Oh yes, definitely.
What was your favorite dish?
Oh God, I don't know. She baked her own bread and did everything. And
was there any favorite thing that she made that you liked the best?
you know, at Thanksgiving time, she was always the one that had the family and the turkey and all the dressing and the pies and the puddings, and she could cook anything. We always had good hearty meals because we had no stores like you have today, supermarkets. You grew your own vegetables, or your neighbors did, and your neighbors usually had chickens. If you wanted chicken, you'd go over and your neighbor would kill one of their chickens, and then you had the thing I didn't like, because I used to have to help her take the feathers and everything off of it. You know, dip it in boiling water and everything, and then the pin feathers and all. I didn't like that part of it, but and then the farmer, we got all our dairy products. The farmer would come in a couple times a week with milk and cheese and eggs and butter, and that's where we buy our dairy products from him. And as I said, she made her own bread, and it was luscious, and I can remember that good. And she'd always butter the loaves after they were baked, and then put them back in the oven to brown them. And one of my very favorite memories, it was in the springtime when the little green onions were coming in, and I love buttermilk, which the farmer used to bring us, and we'd take the end of the fresh loaf of bread and put the butter on it, and the little green onions and a glass of buttermilk, and to me that was ambrosia. I can still taste it, and it's still the most wonderful, to me. I remember it so vividly that I can actually taste it today.
You still love onions, don't you?
Still love onions.
I know, when we go out for dinner, you always eat them.
Huh?
When we go to dinner, you always have extra onions.
I still eat like raw onions, and
Was she artistic or musical?
as I said, she had good taste as far as I said, as far as clothes and everything. But musical, I don't remember anything in that direction. But she was a very hospitable person. She was always having people that she knew in for lunch, people that worked in town or something. She's always having somebody in, and my relatives too from Well City. They would always drive over on Sunday.
Here, we're gonna take a little break.
Take
a little break. You were telling me something about
Oh, I was just saying it was a strange coincidence that the age difference between Alvin and Walter and your grandfather is the same as it is between your father and Peter and John. Your dad is 10 years older than John, Alvin was 10 years older than your grandfather, and Walter was 6 years younger than Alvin, and Peter is 6 years younger than Roger.
Man, that is
Isn't it funny?
interesting. Uh-huh.
Same kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
But they said when Roger was born, Addie was kind of befuddled probably from what they used in those days for when they delivered, and she instead of calling the baby Roger, she says, "Where's Rover?" She was calling it, "Where's Rover?"
Let's talk about your mom a little bit more. Do you remember if she had any bedtime stories when you were little?
I remember, I tell you what I remember vividly was one night when we were going downtown, maybe going over to my grandmother's, I don't know what, and it was winter, and my mother says, "Paul, don't take Irene's hand." So, and it was some kids were sled riding, and we didn't see it, and the rope was across the road, and I fell, and I dragged Paul down with me, and this arm was broken. And after it was set, I remember, she used to rock me in this rocking chair, and every night I can remember so vividly and sing to me, we didn't get pain pills or anything, that was it, And I can remember that so fondly, because that's why I like a rocking chair in the house. I wouldn't be in a house without a rocking chair. I gave my old rocker to Peter, and then I have one in, one in the living room and one in the bedroom. But I love a rocking chair. I just wouldn't would be a home without a rocking chair.
Well, what type of songs would she sing to you? Do you remember any of
Probably
them?
just lullabies,
You don't remember any of them?
I used to sing to your father and everything. For butterfly, da 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 dee, dee, dee. And I used to make up stories, for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a lot to your dad and Peter and John, because we didn't have, radio was coming in a little bit then, but mostly it was books and reading. And if they were home and not feeling well, it was read me a story. We read all the time. And so I think that I think it was good for them,
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, I was being a nurse. When they were sick, rubbing their back or something, giving them a bath and rubbing their back, they loved that, And they didn't mind because they got the deluxe treatment when they didn't feel good.
Was your mom active in the community, or any civic
No,
responsibility?
I don't remember. Oh, only after I became a student nurse, she joined the Women's Auxiliary down at the hospital, and she and the superintendent of the hospital, whose name was Bertha too, they became fast friends. And after my mother passed away, all her life, she married she was from Canada, and she was the administrator and everything else at the hospital. And she and I became very close friends until the day she died. And every time I went to the Chasteville to go to the cemetery, I'd call her and we'd have lunch together. And I went down one time and stayed overnight at her house. And she and I became very close friends. But I was kind of an obstreperous person when I was a student. I was strong, bullheaded, as you might call it. My mother used to say, "You're a stubborn Dutchman." I said, "I'm not Dutch, I'm German." But as I told you before, when the Germans settled in Pennsylvania, the people in Pennsylvania couldn't say Deutsch, so they called them Dutch. So that's where the word Dutch came from. Instead of Pennsylvania, German, Deutsch, they said Dutch.
Did you learn any skills from your mom?
Oh, and I used to, well, I learned how to take care of a house because every weekend, which was the time for her to clean and dust, I wasn't out playing with the other kids. I was in the house helping her do the dusting and the cleaning, and I always, when I was older, I always was the one I always did the dishes. That was my job, to do the dishes always. And then, as I said, being around her, she taught me a few tricks, about basting and sewing, little things that I remember. As I said vividly, I watched her do these things so many times. And in the olden days, people used to have what they called a couch. And it was had a little, like a sloping headrest, and it would be like, what would you call it today? You could lie down and rest on it.
Almost like a sofa or something?
Yeah, and that was in the dining room, because she used the dining room table to cut, put her patterns on and cut, and also the sewing machine was in the dining room too.
Mm-hmm.
But those days we had a big kitchen, so we had the dining table and everything was in the kitchen. You had huge kitchens in those old days. I don't know. That was, I remember that we the dining room table and chairs were in the kitchen area. But so if we didn't feel good, then she would let us lie there on that couch while she went on with her work. So I, was able to watch what she did and do things, and God rest her soul. And as I said, when I got older, she and I grew closer and closer together, just like sisters. I mean, we were very, very close. That's why I miss her so damn much. Our temperaments were alike, and Peter's a lot like I am. That's why we clash. But we get over it quickly. The German temperament is to brood and let it out. If you were German, then I know for myself, then when my temper reaches the boiling point, I take my anger out on the wrong person for the wrong reason at the wrong time. But when you're Irish, you fly up and like that. You get mad in a minute and you're over it in a minute. You forget about it. So I have the two temperaments in me, which is bad.
Do you think you inherited any talents from her?
Oh, I think I inherited her energy and her thoughtfulness, and she had a great sense of humor. And I laugh because I said the first car she owned was an old Model T, and that was the first car I ever learned to drive, the old Model T. It had two pedals. You pushed one in, and then you were in first gear, and you let it out, and you were in high. And then my stepfather bought her a Buick, and she loved that Buick. I mean, she was spitballing, like Rogers with his BMW. She was spitpolishing it every day of the week, and after she died, I was compelled. I thought, I've got to go out and clean the car for my mother, because she wants that car cleaned. I know it. She wants it all polished up, and she just loved that car. And it's always, it was the apple of her eye. She loved, when I got married and moved to Cleveland, she loved to come up to Cleveland, and we'd go downtown and spend the day, going from store to store, the old Higby stores and Sterling and Welsh and all those old stores that used to be downtown. And then she loved to go someplace and have a feast, at the Statler or some place where the food was good and she could have things that you wouldn't get in Ashtabula. And the funny thing was that because her friend Laura Amsden was with us one day, and I don't know where they were having their lunch, whether it was Statler or where, but when it came time for the dessert, Laura said, well, let's have some French pastry. And my mother said, that sounds fine. So of course, when the waiter came, he had this big tray so that you could pick out what you wanted. She said, oh my God, I can't eat all that. She thought it was a single serving. And the other funny thing was that when she had this dear friend and they were together a lot and they were walking around in Ashtabula and past this little place where you could go in and get a bite to eat, and her friend says to her, come on, let's go in here, Bertha, and get something to eat, and I'll pay for it. And I said, oh, let's pay for our own and get something good. And I told that story to so many people, they all get a laugh out of it.
That's cute.
Let's pay for our own and get something good.
Now, did your family, were they a festive family? I mean, did they drink at all? I mean, did your mom drink at all, or did?
No, she couldn't tolerate liquor. Just the smell of it, she'd be dizzy. No, she didn't. At one time she wasn't feeling well, and the doctor ordered her to have porter, which was a dark brew, because it had iron in it or something. She was anemic apparently or something. But other than that, no, we never had. As I said, my stepfather, who was Swedish, always had this little glass of schnapps, as they said, before meals. But that was it. But no, we didn't have liquor. And none of my friends, I never knew what drinking was. My boyfriends, we didn't drink in those days. Today the kids drink beer and wine and God knows what they're into. But it wasn't the thing in those days. In fact, I never started to do any drinking until after I was married to your grandfather. And when we did we played a lot of bridge in the evening with friends, and usually they would have a highball, which was a little bit of something with ginger ale on top. That was it. That was the extent of the drinking. It was very, very minute.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned one time when she got really upset with your brother for jumping on the train. Do you remember any time that she got real upset with you?
Mm-hmm.
What did you do?
Well, we had to wear long underwear, and when winter came, see, we didn't have central heating or anything like that. And we had to put this damn long underwear on in the wintertime, which, from your ankles up, it was and god awful, certainly, but you had to wear it. It was essential because there wasn't any central heating, and we had to go out in the snow and everything, but it wasn't supposed to, you couldn't take it off till your mother said you could take it off, till the weather got good and warm. But I remember it got kind of warm one day, I think in May or something like that, and so I just reached down and pulled the whole thing up above my knees, and when my mother saw that, I got a walloping for that. She was very annoyed with me for that, I remember. But no, we until we were quite grown, we wore like dentlins the houses were cold at night. When there was a big iron stove in the kitchen, and she'd have the oven doors down and the fire lit, and she'd put all our school clothes and underwear and everything on the oven door, so that when we come down to get dressed, our clothes were warm, and we jumped into them in a hurry.
Do you remember any other times when she got really upset with you?
That was the one time that sticks in my memory because she gave me such a good walloping. And she didn't do it a lot, but she had to be really mad before she got the hairbrush out. But sometimes you'd be walking past her and she'd reach out and give me a whack, and I'd say, what was that for? She said, nothing, but you look like you were expecting it.
That's cute. What were some of her best personal qualities?
Pardon?
What were some of her best personal qualities?
Well, I think I gave them to you.
I think you did too. Um, she was fairly strict then, or
Well, as I said, all children were disciplined in those days. You did not, as they say, sass your mother or your father, or give them any lip, what they call giving them any lip, or you would have been, you know, right on the spot. You would have been knocked. You would have gotten it.
What do you think, Irene, were some of the main values she tried to teach you and Paul?
I don't think she tried to teach us. We just absorbed it. I mean, she was, as I told you, about her good qualities and a wonderful mother, and caring, and you know, she was a good cook, and we just, as I said, I'm over and over again, because her picture's in my bedroom right across I talk to her morning and night, good morning mother, and then I talk out loud to her, and thank her for being the wonderful mother she was, because she really was.
Okay, now that this is in your opinion, what was your mother's attitude towards sex and sexuality?
I don't know. I know that she was very attractive. I can remember that. And a couple of times she'd have boarders. In fact, we had one couple that boarded with us by the name of Beersley, and they bred Great Danes, and they built a kennel out in the back of our yard, and then occasionally she would rent out a room, you know, occasionally to somebody, and then they would have sit down and have dinner with us or something. And if she did anything, I don't know when she did it or where or how, because she seemed like she was constantly with us.
Did she ever give you any talks about sex education or anything?
No. That was a theme when I was growing up. Nobody, you just learned it, you know, like Roger learned, you know, from Malcolm about when I was, you know, about how children are, you know, born, how, you know, that was his first lesson on sex, you know.
What?
Remember that story?
No.
Oh, well, when I was pregnant with Peter, he was very observing, and so I told him, I said, well, there's a baby growing in there, so I got down my obstetric books, my nursing book, and I opened it up and showed him, and I said, the baby's floating around inside, there's water in there, and so he won't bump himself and hurt himself. And then I used to take him down to the health museum and show him, they had a whole thing from conception to birth, and we talked very freely about you know, the baby, and but of course at the end he said, well, how did it get in and how's it going to get out? And I wanted to be candid with him, you know, and I said, well, Roger, I could tell you now, but I don't think you'd understand it too well, so when you get a little older, ask me again. So it wasn't until I was pregnant with John, and see, he was 10 years older than John, so John hadn't been born yet, so he was probably 9 or 10 at the time. And this Malcolm, I can't think of his last name now, it slips me, but he was an older boy on the block, and he got all these kids together and spelled it all out to them, you know. He didn't leave anything out, you know. So I remember I was getting dinner ready and I was peeling potatoes, so I was standing by the sink, and he came out all breathless and he said, Malcolm Rockwood, that's it. He said, Mommy, he said, so-and-so, so-and-so, and that's the way, pardon, babies are born. And he said, pardon me. And he said, is that true? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, just think, you and Dad did it 3 times. So that's, when you say that to your father, you know, you did it 3 times.
How were young men and women expected to behave when you were growing up?
Pardon?
How were young men and young women expected to behave when you were growing up?
Expected to what?
In
Behave.
sexually, as
Oh, well, no, God, you didn't let a guy, oh, it was very circumspect. I mean, you know, if you came home, there was a porch swing on the porch or something, or they might put their arm around you and sneak a kiss or a hug or something, but that was, you know, nobody tried to get what we called fresh. Because any girl in town who wasn't strict, you know, according to the way that people thought in those days, right away her reputation was ruined and spread all over town, and you weren't even supposed to speak to that person. I mean, she was really, you know.
what I'm just kind of curious. What do you think your mother's attitude would have been towards premarital sex if she knew you?
I don't think she would have gone for it. No.
Why do you think she would have felt that way?
Well, just because it was in those days that people didn't, I didn't even know about when your menstrual period starts. We weren't told anything. You just, you know, my mother would look at it and, you know, Irene, you know, now it's come, you know, and it was, all I remember this, I was very popular, I had a lot of dates and fun, and I remember I was upstairs and one of the neighbor women were visiting with my mother, and I heard her say to my mother, she said, "Aren't you concerned about Irene and all her dates?" And she said, "No," she said, "I trust her completely." So that was enough that I would never do anything to hurt her. I mean, if I had been tempted or anything else, I always remember saying, "I trust her," and that was it. She trusted me, so if anybody tried to fool around, I would have stopped them. You know, no way.
It never happened though.
No, it just never happened. I mean, even with your grandfather, when before we were married, I mean, he would have loved to have, you know, had a little sexy poo or something, but we didn't. You know, he'd like to feel my bosoms and all things. But there's nothing else. Nothing else. No way. In fact, as I said, that was a big problem because I was a virgin, and your father had when he was at Columbia, he and Albert Lowell, you know, they had plenty of sex and plenty of girls and everything else. So he was way ahead of me as far as sex went. And that was really the bad part of it, because he thought I knew all what to do and how to do it, and I didn't. I was scared to death, really. I didn't know how to enjoy it or anything else. To me, it was something I didn't like, and of course, your father did.
My grandfather.
Your grandfather did. So it took me a hell of a long time, you know.
And then what happened? I mean, did anything ever change?
Well, gradually, the thing that was that I knew about birth control, about people using condoms, but I made the mistake when I was taking music lessons from Sister Mary of the Rosary, and we were talking about my getting married, and she said, "We have children." I said, "Oh no, not for a while. We don't plan." She said, "What?" And that's when I got tipped off that the Catholic Church, you know, you use the rhythm method, but you didn't use any other kind of thing. So it spoiled our whole sex thing, because as soon as anything happened, I had to jump up and run in and take a douche or something. And there was no afterglow. It was just terrible. It was god awful. And then finally, when, I decided the hell with that, you know. And then things got improved, but it took me a long time, because as I said, we didn't want children, and well, that's the way it went. But then once I worked up my appetite, then I got a different story. But your father had to be taught.
Grandfather.
Your grandfather had to be taught how to make love before you have sex. You know, not one of these, I'm ready, if you're not ready, the hell, no. It's me, you know.
Foreplay or
Yeah,
whatever.
you know, nothing. I had to teach him, you know, to lie and fondle each other and hug each other and, you know, do a little of that.
Sure, foreplay. Sure. Okay.
That's when we use the side porch.
Was there anything that was real unusual about your mother?
I can't say that there was I don't know what other people, I know she was well liked, and as I told you, aside from the qualities that I remember best about her, I don't know of anything special.
Okay. Any disappointments or tragedies in your mom's life?
Well, of course, I would say there was when my father waltzed off and left us. But,
How did she cope with that?
well, see, I was only 7 years old at the time. So I really wasn't aware that he was gone for a long time. You see, because he might have been away on a trip or something, and it took a long while before Paul or myself realized that he was gone and he wasn't coming back.
What type of business was your father in?
He was kind of a person who was a jack of all trades. One time he had a photographer's studio, and then one time he worked for the AMPT company and drove one of their wagons around, you know, or whatever. And I don't know what else he did, but I mean, he was kind of that, you know, kind of a, what you call, jack of all trades, I suppose.
So obviously she had to cope with your father leaving, but did she ever show any of it at all?
Yes, when my brother became of age, he wrote a letter. First time he ever wrote to my brother, asking him if he wanted to come and live with him. And my mother hit the roof. I thought the whole goddamn house was going to fall in. She just exploded. You know?
And as I recall, he wanted Paul to come work for him, right?
Come and live with him. Up to this time,
How
point in time.
How old was Paul?
Well, he had just come of age. He was 18.
18.
Yeah, he had just come of age.
And he hadn't heard anything since he was 7.
And nothing.
And then he got
Since he
left.
was 10 years old. After he left, we never heard
Okay.
anything from him. This was the first time. So my mother, oh boy, she boiled over and good. I remember vividly her screaming and everything.
Well, who was she
rage.
screaming at?
She was just screaming and yelling and swearing, I suppose, and everything else, just because to think that he would
Have the gall to do that.
Yeah.
What happened?
What happened was that my brother certainly didn't go.
Where was your father?
I don't know, because I don't remember. It's so many years ago, and I don't know where the letter came from.
Was she the type to dwell on her misfortunes, or was she more the type who picks up and goes on?
No, I never heard. She wasn't a whiner or no. I never remember her doing that. If she had trouble, she kept them to herself. I don't remember her ever making me or Paul uncomfortable about anything that happened to her. I'm not as good as she is at that. I do plenty of writing. But I don't remember her doing it. My memory is so good about all that.
You are. It's very good. I'm glad we're doing this today. Do you know if she had any strong religious faith?
Oh, but yes, because she was Catholic, and she saw that we were brought up Catholic, and we observed all the holy days, all the discipline, you know, those are the days when no meat on Friday, and when Lent came around, you gave up something that you liked, candy or ice cream, and for the whole of Lent, and we had to go to the Stations of the Cross in the middle of the week, and benediction, and no, she was very, very much, that was why didn't think that my marriage with your grandfather was a good thing, because she felt that our backgrounds, she was very fond of your grandfather and Roger, and of course his mother and father were both dead, and so she treated him, you know, treated him like he was one of her children when he came, and she cooked things that she knew he liked, and when he had a birthday, one time she made him a birthday cake, and and candles on it, and he never had one. He was out, because he just, there's a picture of that around somewhere too, and he was holding the cake, he was so happy over it. No, she liked him, and she treated him royally, but she felt that our backgrounds and the religious thing was too great to, and of course, I'll tell you something, Tony, I really didn't know what it was to be in love. I was busy, doing my nursing, I was a student nurse, and then I did private duty after that, and then I met your father, and when I dated the boys, it was usually because they were good dancers and things like that, and I never really, now I know have learned what true love can be, but I don't think that, and I know I kept telling your father that over and over again that I didn't think that we should get married, but it just went in one ear and out the other. I could talk myself blue in the face, and it didn't register with him that I was feeling that way, because he was so damn determined.
No, he was Jewish, right?
Yes.
Now, how did your mom feel about you marrying a Jew?
Well, that's what I said. She didn't want me to marry Roger, and she was very much against it, because she felt there was too great a difference in our backgrounds and upbringing and everything else. And of course, when your father was dating me when I was a student nurse at Mount Sinai, and he went gaga, so to speak. Do you want to go out, Lucy?
No, she's fine. She's gonna say hi.
God love you. Won't give me his kiss. No, when I met your dad, he was dating me at Mount Sinai.
My grandfather.
Yeah, he went real gaga. You know, he thought I was the best thing that come along. As I said, if his mother and father had been living, we would never have been married, because in those days you had to marry a rich Jewish girl, and since his mother and father were dead, there was no money, no way for him to marry a rich Jewish girl, so poor Shixel was the next best thing.
Okay.
No, when he said he wanted to marry me, I said, well, I can't marry you. He said, why not? I said, because I'm Catholic. He said, what difference does that make? And then I was explaining to him, you know, about the Catholic religion and the children having to be raised Catholic and everything, and I thought that would stop him.
And it didn't stop him, obviously.
No, that's why your father's name is Aloysius.
Now, why don't you tell me a little bit about your mom's health? Was she in good health generally?
Always good health until this thing.
The cancer?
Yeah. And I think it was because she had to be sedentary so much, and of course, those days, the sewing machines were at least treadle time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember her that she was always dosing on laxatives, you know, because she was apparently having a problem there. But her appetite was great, and it wasn't until as I said, when I was pregnant with Peter, and and we were living in Ashtabula or in Cleveland, and we were sitting in the backyard talking. She said, you know, Irene, I just haven't felt like myself this year. She said, because usually in the spring she was either painting a wall or papering something or slip covering something. She was always making changes and things in the house and it was very attractive. Our home was very attractive. I enjoyed bringing people in because it wasn't, you know,
Mhm.
she liked nice things, and she was, you know, had good taste. Nothing elaborate, but, you know, just
Sure.
comfortable and good taste.
Sure.
And, but she said, you know, Irene, I don't know what it is, I don't feel like myself, I didn't, and I had got material for her to make a maternity dress for me, and she said, you know, I'm glad you got that extra material, because she said, I cut it out all the wrong way, and she would never have done that. I mean, sewing was second nature to her, and it went on slowly, and I blame myself. I really I get mad at myself. I said, I was stupid, because I should have taken her to Dr. Burroughs in Cleveland, because in Ashtabula, because he was well known all over. He was a marvelous surgeon, a marvelous doctor. But I wanted to do this, so I brought her to Cleveland and took her to Dr. Lambright, then, who was supposed to be a leading internist and everything. And he gave her some tests, but he didn't say nothing about a malignancy. And then finally it advanced, and then she began to become jaundiced, because her liver and all her digestive organs were involved.
So she had a cancer.
Yeah, all the digestive organs were involved.
Did she ever talk to you about her attitude toward death and dying?
Well, of course, I was down with her, and before, finally she lost weight and everything. Oh, it was miserable to see her, because she was a handsome woman. She was, well, not beautiful, but handsome, you know, like me. And to see her deteriorating and that way, it just was killing me. And as I said, I had her at the Cleveland Clinic. I had her everywhere, you know, trying to do what I thought was the right thing. And finally, she decided that she'd have surgery, and so I talked to Dr. Burroughs, because he knew me as a student nurse and everything, and he didn't want to do it. He said, you know, he said, I'll just open her up and close her up, and that'll be it. And I said, you have to do it, because if you don't, she'll linger on for God knows how many months and just die slowly, a slow death. So before she went to the hospital, of course I was down there to be with her and get ready, and she gave me advice. She said, go and get me some nice nightgowns. She said, if anything happens, you can have them, pick out something you like. So, you know.
So she had a happy-go-lucky attitude about
Yeah,
the whole thing.
Yeah. But as I said, he opened her up and closed her, and that was it. She was dead in 3 days.
Do you think she believed in any kind of afterlife?
We never talked about it. We never did, no, there was never any discussions like that. And of course, when I tried to talk to your father and his brothers and tell them things I wanted them to do, they shushed me up. They said, oh, you know, they don't mean it. You know, I said, well, I want you to do this. I said, I don't mind dying. I know I'm going to die, but I want to be there to see that you do what I want. If you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to haunt you. You know?
Do you think you share the same attitude that your mom had about afterlife?
Well, we never.
I mean, about death and dying?
Well, to me, I didn't expect to live to be as old as I am, really. And for my nursing, I knew about death, because when we were student nurses, we had no graduate nurses teaching us. The senior nurses were the teachers. We had no interns or things like that around.
Mm-hmm.
And if a patient died, when you were on duty, you had to give that patient a full bath. If they had dentures, you had to put their dentures in. You had to comb their hair. If it was a woman, you had to comb her hair and braid it. And we had to stuff all their orifices with cotton. And then we had to cross their hands across their chest and tie their knees together, tie their ankles together, wrapped them in a sheet and put a tag on it for the undertaker, otherwise he wouldn't take them. So when I was 18 years old, I knew what dying and death was. The kids, these student nurses today, they don't know what kind of nursing that we had. They wouldn't be able to take it.
What do you think is the most important thing you learned from your mother?
I didn't hear you.
What was the most important thing you think you learned from your mother?
Just to be a good person, to be thoughtful and of other people, and be honest and you know, live a good life, and you know, not to do anything that would disgrace anybody or harm anybody, because it just wouldn't have been tolerated. So that was it.
Did your mother leave any personal belongings or heirlooms that you still have, or any
I
other?
still have, yes, she had some things that she liked, and I have them, and you'd have to come over to the house and I'll show them to you. But, and of course she always wore a pince-nez. She never, you know what I'm talking about? Kind of glasses that pinch on your nose.
Mm-hmm.
And I have her glass case and her old glasses, and she always loved to wear earrings. And every time she came to visit Roger and me when we lived on Superior Road in that little apartment with a pull-down bed, you know, that pulled out on the wall, she'd sleep on that when she came. And the minute she took her hairnet and her earrings off and put them down, Skippy had them and chewed them up. She was always having to get, but she always just, we just went to the dime store and she liked these little pearl earrings, you know. We'd go to the dime store and buy them or something, and then if we had guests, we didn't have an extra wardrobe, a closet, you know, for guest closet, so we'd always take things, the guest coats and the women's gloves. In those days, everyone wore gloves. And put them on our bed, and damn it, Skippy, we tried to corral him and get him in the kitchen, and you know, keep him there with the door, with a chair or something. But he would he was way ahead of us, and he'd always took the women's gloves and got under the bed and chewed that. And your dad your grandfather always having to buy kid gloves for the women, because that was the thing he went for. And he'd get on one side of the bed and I'd get on the other on the floor. We'd try to grab him, and he was so cute. He's just slippery around that we could never catch him.
What kind of dog was it?
Wire-haired terrier. And then, yes, when I was going through the things the other day, I found a picture of him too. That was another thing.
That's cute. Anything about your mom that I didn't ask? Anything important that I might have left out?
I can't think of anything, because the things that you talk to me about are the things that are most vivid in my memory about her.
Okay. Well, now we're going to talk. Do you want to rest for a minute, or do you want to continue?
No, it depends on what are you going to talk about.
Well, we're going to talk about your father for a few minutes.
I don't know much about my father.
Okay. Well,
I told you that. I didn't know him after I told you what I all.
Do you remember what he looked like at all?
My brother Paul looks a lot like him.
Mm-hmm.
But you never saw Paul, so you don't know. I have a picture. As I said, when I was going through all these things yesterday, I found an old picture of my father. But Paul looked exactly like my father, and I looked like my mother.
Is there anything about his childhood or anything that?
I don't know a damn thing about him. Pardon my French.
Okay.
I mean, he was my father, and what I told you I remembered is that's it.
Okay. Well, you were only 7, so I understand. Why don't we talk about your uncles and your aunts? Let's go on with some of your other members of your family. Any favorite uncles or aunts that were important to you?
Well, they all were. I mean, as I told you, her twin brother, he was...
His name was again?
Oh, he was always generous. I mean, every time we were around him, he was always... In those days, if you weren't used to money, but he was always handing us a 50-cent piece or a dollar bill or something. In those days, that was a magnanimous amount. I mean, you just, you know.
What was his name again, Irene?
Bert.
Bert.
Yeah, see, my mother, then they named the twins, she was Bertha and he was Bert. And then
That's,
my uncle Ed, as I said, he was the managing editor for the paper down there. And the younger brother died with smallpox. And when had graduated, and the superintendent wasn't it wasn't Bertha Krillman, then it was a new superintendent, Miss Bloomberg, and she called at the house, and my mother happened to answer the phone. And she said she wanted to talk to me, and my mother said, well, what about it? She said, well, she wanted me to take a case of there was somebody with smallpox, and my mother came out at her, and she said, no way, no way. And then she told me about her father and losing her brother, so she said, no, you can't, I won't let Irene go. So that was that.
do you remember any of your aunts?
Oh yeah, Aunt Gussie, she was a character.
Now, how is she related to you?
Well, she was married to Uncle Ed. He married her, as I said.
And Ed was your mom's brother.
Brother Ed, and I think he was older than she and Bert, and then Charlie was on the other end of it. But he married this. Her name was Augusta, but we call her Aunt Gussie, and she was a character. You know what she used to do? When there was a funeral, she'd go to the graveyard, and after everything was over and the flowers, were still left there on the casket, she'd go and pick herself a bouquet and take it home.
Did people see her doing this?
Huh?
Did people? She would.
After everybody cleared away, well, she'd go and and pick out a bouquet of flowers for herself. Take them home. Oh, she was. Oh.
Do you remember anything else about her?
No, she was just fun, and as I say, I keep saying fun all the time. That's all I remember about people. None of them caused me any unpleasant memories. And my Aunt Margaret was a devout Catholic too, and I remember when we
Aunt Margaret was married
to Uncle Bert.
Okay.
And she was a devout Catholic, and when we stayed at her house at night, that she came in with the holy water and sprinkled my brother or me or whoever we were staying, with the holy water at night. I remember that.
When you were sleeping?
No, before when we went to bed, when we said our prayers. She was, that was, very, religion was playing a big part in people's life, I think, in the olden days, more than it does today.
Did you actually get down on your knees every night and pray?
Oh yes, I did, after I knew your father and Alvin, and when your grandfather's brother Alvin's, when I stayed at their house overnight, and he saw me kneeling and praying. He couldn't get over it. I mean, it was a habit. I don't get down on my knees, but I do pray, but I don't get down on my knees anymore because I have a heck of a time getting up. But we always knelt and said your morning and evening prayers.
Your uncles and aunts. Do you remember anything else about that?
Nothing distinguishing, except, as I said, my Uncle Bert was always in the restaurant or hotel business, and he had his close friend was a man by the name of Weiss. I'm trying to think of Joe. I think Joe Weiss, and they were always partners, together. And I remember when he had the hotel, he used to like to tease me and walk me through. See, women didn't go into hotel places and order drinks in those days. There was a little back place where if a lady wanted a drink, she could go in through this little back entrance and order a drink. It was all secluded and just for that privacy. But he would like to, and then in those days they always had food on the bar, a free lunch, what they called free lunch. They'd always have cold meats and cheese, hard-boiled eggs and stuff, So when the people bought a drink, they could just go over and help themselves to the lunch. And he would take me by the hand and make me walk this whole length of this bar and the men were sitting around and they were just laughing and joking, because he knew I was, I was ashamed of myself. I was, trying to hide behind him, and so he wouldn't see me. And then he'd take me out and take me to this little room where they had for the ladies, and in those days, they had what they call sarsaparilla, which I just loved, and he'd bring me a sarsaparilla.
How old were you then, do you think?
Oh, well, I was going to school, so in first grade or something, I was 7 or 8 years old, I was just young.
Were there any cousins that you remember that were important to
I didn't
you?
have any cousins.
Because none of your, that's
Oh,
right.
well, the only ones that would be my cousins were in my father's family, and I said, if they had children, I don't know. You know, I don't know anything about them.
Did you know you didn't know any of your cousins on your father's side?
No, I just knew his two brothers, as I said. And if they had children, I didn't ever have a chance to know them.
Okay, well, let's talk about Paul for a little bit.
Huh?
Let's talk about Paul.
You're Paul.
Yes, your brother.
Oh, well, Paul's personality and mine were entirely different. I'm very extroverted, and he was very, what do you call it?
Introverted?
Introverted. He didn't talk a lot. He didn't say a lot, but when he was annoyed, you could tell because he was very fair skinned and blonde hair, and when he was something was bothering him, you could see the vein in his temple pulsating. It was just get blue and pulsate. You know, but he wouldn't let the rage out. He held it in. He did the same thing when he was married to Austria. He used to get so damned annoyed because, you know, she was Swedish and she was always having these people in. They were running in and out through the house and everything, and he didn't like it, but he wouldn't let it out. And he had a nervous breakdown, and he was had to be hospitalized.
How old was he?
Well, it was after Mary was born because in those days, what they did with people that were mentally disturbed, they used to put them in these tub baths, you know, that was treatment for them. And I remember when the first time I went over to see him at the, was it Cleveland, oh, so many years ago, what was it called, Cleveland Metropolitan Hospital, or whatever it was. And I remember going in and they would unlock a series of doors and let you in, unlock it, and then they'd go over and unlock another one. And when I went in, there was some man standing and saying, "You're Paul Richter's sister." And I, you know, they were, it was strange, you know, the behavior of these people. And he came out of that all right.
Good.
And then...
how long, do you remember how long he was in the hospital for?
No, but it was probably a good 6 months or so. It was quite a while, because I would take Ostrid over, you know, on Sundays, you know, when I had the car, and we'd go over, and but I remember Mary had been born. She was Ostrid could tell you more about that than I can. You know.
No, yeah, that's not that important. But Mary is his only child, right?
Yes, he was my only. He and I were the only offspring, only.
Right, and Mary was his only.
And Mary was his only child,
Okay.
and that's why I always call her the daughter I never had.
That's right.
Because I wanted Johnny. I was expecting Johnny. I wanted it to be a girl, and I had a name all picked out for him. And
What was the name?
Karen.
Oh, that's nice.
So when she.
Did you ever take care of Paul? I mean, did you ever have to cook for him or do any of that when you were little?
No. In fact, when we were children, he didn't. I was a pain in the neck to him because my mother would, you know, when people would come, she'd say, "Paul, you and Irene sit down and play a duet or something," or Paul, take Irene to hold, and so I was a thorn in his side. He really, and when I was in high school and would bring my girlfriends to the house, he'd walk past them, he wouldn't even say hello to them or anything. After my mother died, he turned to me and he became very, very dependent on me. All of a sudden, I was it. And when your grandfather went to, the first time he went to the, was it the Bahamas or something with Eddie Bamberger and that crowd, and the kids came down with, was it measles and whooping cough or something? They were sick, and he called me and he came up on the bus you know, he said, I'm coming up and help you, you know. And instead he sat down and played the piano, and I poured some drinks out, and I was dancing and he was playing the piano. And Austria remembers it because she said he came home and he was so looped.
Where were they living?
I was we were living in Ashtabula then. Or Cleveland, I mean then.
And he was in Ashtabula?
No, he was living in Cleveland with Austria.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did he like to drink too?
At that time, he wasn't a heavy drinker, but I mean, if we sat down to drink, why, that's what we did. We sat down to drink.
Mm-hmm. And so he would play the piano and you danced when he came up.
He was playing the piano and I was dancing around.
And your husband Roger was down in the Bahamas.
Roger was in the Bahamas, and we had Austria will tell you about that day. She laughs about it to this day. She still gets a big kick out of it. And so when in the summer when he'd have his vacation from work, he'd always set a day aside to come and spend the day with me. And when we grew up, he learned to swim in the Allegheny River. My mother just had fits, and I never learned to swim until we moved to Ashtabula. And there was a wonderful beach there, and sandy beach, where they had dredged it all the way to the break wall, and you could walk on sand. And I just learned to dog paddle.
In Lake Erie?
Huh?
In Lake Erie?
Yeah.
And he was. Why would she get upset with him swimming in the Allegheny River?
Pardon?
You said.
Oh, when we lived in West City, the Allegheny River ran through the town, divided it from the north and the south side. And the Blue Ridge Mountains, the tail of the Blue Ridge Mountains we had hills all around us. This is why when they said, when we were moving to Ohio, they said it's flat country, and I just thought you could see on infinitum, I mean, into infinity. You know, I said, what, you know, nothing to stop your vision. Because I was used to the hills.
Sure, sure.
And so when I learned to swim, so I wanted to show off one day, and he was going to spend the day with me. We went out to Fell Lake where we used to go swimming, and there was a little platform there where you could dive off, and so I was trying to show off, you know, so I took a dive in and went down deep and came up, and he sat there kind of nonchalantly, and he said, see anybody you knew?
How old were you then?
Well, I was married, and he was married.
Oh.
I mean, but he was, you know, he was just, you know, is anybody down there you knew? Or something, you know. I was trying to impress him, you know, with my skill. He was funny.
Wait 1 second. Talking about your brother Paul a little bit more.
He had a heart attack and had to be hospitalized and in an oxygen tent and everything like that. And Mary and
In
her
Austria?
husband,
Oh.
God, and Johnny was about 10 or 11 years old. We went down to see him, and he was at Women's Hospital, and he was convalescing then, and we were just having a ball with him. I guess we were laughing and joking, and then I was working in the emergency room at that time, and he was discharged shortly after that, and I was working that Sunday in the emergency room, and so when I got home, I called immediately to see how he was, and I said, how's Paul? She said, oh, you want to talk to him? He's here. I said, what? She had all of her family. She had 7 sisters, and she had everybody in, and they were drinking and carrying on like mad, and
In Austria did?
yeah, I practically had a heart attack because I thought, my God, he's, you know,
Just out of the
he should have been back in the room being quiet. That night she calls me about 2 in the morning. He got up out of bed and died. And I always blamed it on her. I always said she did. It was absolutely ridiculous to have a man who was damn near died on her come home and then have all these, because her people were noisy and drink, you know, and they were, all this commotion was going on, and he was lying there on the Davenport or something. I didn't say anything at the time, but and then when she called him, said that he got up in the middle of the night and went into the living room and just was gone.
Oh.
And I still, in my heart, still hold it. that tiny
Yeah.
feeling that, you know, it would have been different if she hadn't been so thoughtless, you know.
Mhm. I'm sure it's tough. Um, when you and Paul were growing up, you said that he had to always take care of you. Do you remember anything else
No,
about
but
him?
my mother, when I was smaller, she'd always tell Paul to be, to be protective of me, now you do this with Irene, or you take her hand, or do something, and it got to be so that he couldn't stand me.
Do you remember any funny stories about him?
No, I just remember that he worked for the Willard Storage Battery Company, and he was a hard-working person, one of these old-fashioned, steady kind of guys, dependable and all, but just a quiet family man. I mean, he wasn't. I don't remember him doing anything, extraordinary,
Did he have any special skills, talents?
except playing the piano.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends, she was still living. We used to have boat trips at night in Cleveland. You could go up, get on the boat, and go to Buffalo or Detroit from Cleveland, overnight. And then people would be dancing, and she said she was on this boat one night and heard somebody playing the piano like mad, and it was Paul. And everybody was gathered around, because all I said, this, as he played by ear, he could just sit down, and that was the thing that, that I lost my touch for. But I used to be able to do it too,
Mm-hmm.
because I just had my
An ear
ears
for it.
had good pitch.
Okay.
But he wasn't an extravagant man or anything like that. He was quiet. And as I said, he was, Ostrid was the one, because she had all these sisters and their family, and they were all coming up, and Paul liked all of them, and he was a quiet person, as I said. He held his feelings inside, and I spit them out. I can, even today when I'm alone, I can kick something or swear or throw something or vent my feelings, He couldn't do that.
Are there any special memories about Paul that you remember right now?
About Paul?
Yeah, anything?
Well, the ones that I mentioned, that
Mm-hmm.
as a child, I was a pain in his side, because my mother was always, asking him to look out for me, and that was that stayed with him for years, and my mother was always disturbed by it, because she and I got along like Mike and Ike, and Paul was always a little distant, with her, and it bothered her. It hurt her feelings. I don't think he knew that he was hurting her feelings, but he just wasn't close to her the way I was, and that was the contrast,
Mm-hmm.
because she and I were so close, and he didn't have it, and he didn't even have it for me, as I said, till after she died. And then when she died, his whole attitude toward me changed. It was like I was the only thing that he had to cling to,
Was there anybody else associated with your family who was important to you when you were growing up? Any nurses or family friends?
Oh yeah, there were man who was the head man for the M.A. Hanna Company, Amsden. He was a good friend of my father's. In fact, he wanted my grandfather, or my stepfather, could have been promoted and gone higher in the company, but he never had an education, so he never got a chance to go to school or high school. So he knew that he wasn't adequately qualified. But no, he and what was Mr. Rams's first name? But anyhow, they had an orange grove down in Florida, and they used to go down every winter and spend time down there when the navigation was closed. You see, when the lakes froze over, the navigation was, and he took my mother down with him, and she didn't like it. She said she couldn't stand the heat, you know, she didn't like it. But he loved it to go down there. That was his thing he looked forward to each year, was to, when his vacation came, to go down and I think it was a place called Claremont, Florida, and they had this orange grove together, you know, and then he'd send crates of oranges back to us, you know. He was a quiet man, very quiet.
Okay.
He had a large family too. I mean, he had about 5 brothers and some sisters, and they all are buried in that one area down there, you know, where my mother's buried, and the Johnsons and the Swedenborgs. You see their names all over the place, a whole bunch of them.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you just one more question. It's kind of off the subject, and then we're gonna end the interview for today, because we've been doing this for a couple hours already. When you I remember you used to have some friends.
My gay friends?
Yes.
Oh, I love them. They were wonderful. I met them all after I was divorced from your grandfather.
Oh, how did you meet them?
Well, one of my very dear friends, Thelma Pale, she and I had been friends. We were close friends. And she was, as Ray made more and more money, why she spent more and more, and they had beautiful homes, and she always had this Mr. Van Warmer do her decorating for her. He worked, and at that time there was Irene and Gormley on the corner where the shop was, where your mother was with the miller.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was Irene and Gormley.
Like Shaker Square.
Yeah, and so he worked for them, and he did all her upholstery and anything she needed in the way of interior decorating. And I met him, and then I used to belong to the Playhouse, and I was coming home one night from a class. I was taking a real estate class, and they were rehearsing for the medium when Madame George played the part of the medium. And they took the company to New York. She was so good, and I thought, oh, I'll stop in and watch the rehearsal. And I met Jim Byrne, and Jim Byrne was gay, and his family were very well-to-do, and they changed their name to Burns, and they had a big home there on Edgehill between Kenilworth and Overlook Road, where the Christian Science Church is or was. And so I met, when you meet one and they find out that you're not unattached, and then after the rehearsal he invited the whole bunch of us up to his house on Edgehill, and when you meet one, you start meeting them all. And I did, and they had a wonderful time. They treated me royally. I mean, Jim gave lavish dinners, and so did Van and Bruce, and everything was catered, and everything was done. You know.
Were they fun, crazy type parties?
Oh,
dancing and singing?
Wonderful. Some of the people were gay and some were straight. It was a mixed crowd. I met a lot of people there that I had no idea were gay, and I don't think they were, but they were part of the crowd, because they all, see, all those gay people that I knew, and I think a lot of them do, they're very artistic. They're interested in the arts and theater and dance and all of them. And every one of them had excellent jobs. They all made money, and they treated me royally. They took me to theater and concerts, and you know, I was treated like, as I said, just royally. And they met my children, and Peter knew them. They all knew them, and I mean, the kids accepted them. They were